joining us for our regular Friday chat, the Finance Minister and Leader of the Government in the Senate, Matthias Korman. Thanks very much for your time, as always. One of your WA colleagues really generated a lot of attention this week, a lot of controversy too, it has to be said, in relation to his comments about China. Andrew Hastie likened the world's response to the rise of China to that of the rise of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Do you agree with his assessment?
Well, look, Andrew Hastie is a valued friend and colleague for all of us, but I, from my point of view, I didn't agree with that sort of comparison. I thought it was a bit clumsy and inappropriate. But I mean, having said that, I mean, there are of course issues that are very legitimately part of the public conversation, public debate. Our relationship with China is a very important relationship. We've got an important strategic as well as economic relationship with China, and there are matters to be discussed from time to time. We seek to do that from the government's point of view with transparency and consistency, and work through any issues as they arise in the appropriate fashion, and to work cooperatively with China as we do with all of our other partners.
A number of people in the foreign policy space have made the point in the last 24 hours, to me personally, some publicly as well, that there are some of the points, a lot of the points that Andrew Hastie made that many would agree with, but that he's inflamed the situation with that comparison, that he went too far on that. Would you agree with that characterisation?
Well, I've just made the point, in my first answer. I mean, I thought that was a clumsy and inappropriate analogy, and it detracts from what I think broadly is an important conversation. Now, there are issues to be discussed. There are issues to be worked through in any of our relationships, and from the government's point of view, acting in our national interest, of course, we stand up to protect our sovereignty. But of course, we also work to have good and cooperative and positive relationships, with all of our important partners around the world, in particular with all of our important partners around this region.
In terms of the China relationship, is it something where you think that we're going to have to navigate, basically tread on eggshells for decades to come when it comes to managing that relationship?
No, I mean, I think that we've got to be ourselves. We've got to obviously, act consistent with our values. We've got to be predictable. We've got to be transparent, and we've got to be consistent. And obviously, we, as every other sovereign nation, stand up for our sovereignty, and we pursue our national interest. I mean, that is what you would expect every country to do, but we do it in the appropriate fashion and in a way that seeks to develop positive and cooperative relationships all around.
And in terms of that, do you think this has made it more difficult for the likes of yourself and Trade Minister Birmingham and the Prime Minister, for that matter? I know the Prime Minister didn't criticise Andrew Hastie, but the fact is he's someone who is respected, as you said at the outset. He's the chair of the Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. He's a much respected former SAS captain in that sense as well. So his words carry weight, and therefore you would think maybe just cause a few headaches for yourself and others trying to rebuild relations with Beijing.
No, I don't believe so. I mean, obviously, Andrew Hastie is a valued friend and colleague. He's a backbencher. He talks on his personal behalf, putting his personal views. He doesn't talk on behalf of the government. I think the government's position in relation to these matters is very clear, and we will continue to act consistent with the position that I've outlined.
Yeah, but how would you characterise the relationship right now? Is it getting back on track in a bilateral sense? Because we know there have been a number of shipments of coal held up at various ports in China. Are things starting to smooth out with our northern neighbour?
Well, China is our, obviously biggest two-way trading partner. We've got a free trade agreement with China. We've got a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with China, and we will continue to do what we always do, and that is to work on the most positive, most cooperative relationship possible. I mean, that has been our approach. That we will continue to act, openly and consistently, deal with issues even as they arise, make judgments in our national interest, advancing our national interest and protecting our sovereignty. I mean, these are the decisions that you would expect any sovereign nation to make. Indeed, I mean, this is the basis on which China makes its decisions.
The top public servant who you know well and had a lot to do with over the years, Martin Parkinson, on his final days basically in the job, he says the US-China trade war is going to play out for decades and could easily disrupt growth. I think it already is doing that here and elsewhere, disrupting growth, that is. But do you think it's the sort of thing that will play out over decades, or would you be hopeful that Donald Trump might pull off a miracle and come up with some deal in the short term?
Well, Kieran, I've read Martin's remarks, and you and others who've reported them drop out a very important qualifier in his remarks. And he said that this would, he feared, be the case without a new and sustainable accommodation between the US and China. And, obviously I'm quietly optimistic. I mean, the US and China clearly have been making efforts to find a new and sustainable accommodation. I mean, there have been various, very high-level conversations taking place at the G20 in Buenos Aires and again more recently in Osaka. And no doubt there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes, in between those various get-togethers. I mean, certainly, as I've said here and elsewhere on a number of occasions, it's in nobody's interest for trade tensions between the US and China to continue to escalate. It's not in our interest, but it's not in the interest of the US and China either. I mean, it's got obviously a negative impact on trade, on growth, and that is not in the interest of any of the trading nations around the world, which includes, of course, the US and China. So, I'm hopeful and quietly optimistic that, over time, the necessary resolutions will be found. I mean, we support the US view that the rules-based global trading system is in urgent need of repair to better accommodate and reflect the realities that we're dealing with today, in particular in the context of large emerging economies and the economic structures and practices that, of course, they pursue in this time and age. And that there's a body of work to be done there. But if we were to fail in relation to all of this, yes, it would have a very negative effect. But I'm more optimistic than that.
Glass half full. And I guess you would have been reassured by the movements on global markets overnight off the back of a more stable Chinese currency. The Dow ended up, was up 371 points. Do you think that is maybe an early sign that things could be levelling out? Because Donald Trump, as we know, does like to talk up the strength of Wall Street.
Well, obviously, what happens in the global economy is very relevant to Australia as an open trading economy. When we want to sell as many Australian products and services into markets around the world, the stronger the global economy, the better for the Australian economy. So, of course, we're always mindful of downside risks and upside opportunities in the global economy. So, we always prefer to see things picking up rather than slowing down. You obviously won the recent election on the back of, in large part, the economy, the strength of the economic outlook. We're expecting, well, most analysts expecting the RBA governor this morning, when he gives his monetary statement in 15 minutes, to revise down the outlook for growth. How do you see that? What's causing that in terms of a government, as we know, in an economy that's just been re-elected on the basis of the strength of that particular management, and yet we've got this growth outlook being revised down today? Well, firstly, our economy continues to grow. We are into our 28th year of continuous growth, a record number of Australians in jobs, a AAA rated economy, our budget returning to surplus after more than 10 years in deficits. I mean, the fundamentals are strong, but as we said during the campaign, and as we've said consistently since, our economy does face a series of headwinds and downside risks. I mean, the global economy being one, drought, floods, you name it. But the whole point during the campaign was that given the headwinds and the challenges we're facing, the worst thing we could do is to impose $387 billion in higher taxes, which would have made our economy weaker compared to where we are, and in the light of the challenges that we're facing, and the Australian people shared our judgment. So whatever our situation is now, it is and will be stronger than it would have been if an alternative government had imposed hundreds of billions of dollars in higher taxes on the Australian economy and on jobs.
And do you remain, an optimist in the face of a growth rate that is being revised down in terms of our local economic performance? I mean, what's going to hold it up if the RBA runs out of ammunition, which it's pretty close to doing right now?
Well, we are pursuing, obviously, an agenda to continue to build a stronger economy. I mean, $300 billion in lower income taxes, lower taxes for business, an ambitious free trade agenda, getting better access to markets around the world for exporting businesses. I mean, when we came into government, the percentage of markets that were covered by free trade agreements was below 30%. We're now above 70%, and we're working towards a coverage of about 90% by pursuing, of course, now the European Union as our next opportunity for a free trade agreement. We're pursuing an ambitious infrastructure investment program to improve the, competitiveness of our trading infrastructure in particular, and improve the connectivity in our cities. So, I mean, we are pursuing a comprehensive agenda that is designed on making the Australian economy as competitive and as resilient as possible. That is, of course, what the Australian people voted for at the last election.
Appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Always good to talk to you.